Sagittarius. Destiny marks you. Death is approaching. Someone you loved will return, and the ending. Wow, can you feel it? That strange hush before something ancient moves. Not the fear of what's ending, but the quiet awe of what's returning. You were never meant to walk a path that others understood. Yours was written in symbols the world forgot how to read. In the wind's sudden stillness, in the ache that visits at 3 a.m., in the dreams that don't fade with morning light. And now something stirs. A soul contract. A cosmic ripple. A breathless pause before the universe opens a door you thought was sealed shut. There's a love that never truly left you. A person whose energy still brushes your skin like memory. And whether they come back in flesh, in spirit, or through the final letting go, the ending won't be an end. It will be a revelation. What's coming isn't a repeat of the past. It's a return to yourself. The version of you that once loved without fear. The one who was cracked open not to break, but to become light. This message is not a warning. It's an awakening. A sacred unfolding. A homecoming. So take a breath, Sagittarius. Not a shallow one, but a breath that reaches the corners of your soul you've forgotten how to touch. What's ahead won't just change your story. It will complete it. And in Gate 1, we begin where the soul first trembled. Gate 1, the shift begins where the soul once broke. There's a moment no one sees, Sagittarius. A moment that doesn't come with thunder, or a date circled on a calendar, or the kind of announcement the world deems important. No, your moment began long ago, in silence, when your laughter still echoed in the hallway, but your heart had already stopped trusting the sound of your own joy. When you smiled through conversations and nodded politely, while something deep inside you whispered, "This isn't me anymore." That was when destiny first touched your spirit, not to break it, but to prepare it. You've always been the firewalker, the seeker, the wild soul that others couldn't understand. They thought your wanderlust was restlessness, your depth was drama, your faith in love was foolishness. But they never knew what you carried. You held not just dreams but entire galaxies. You loved not just people but their possibilities. And every time someone couldn't meet you at that depth, they didn't just disappoint you. They cracked something. You began to fracture in places no one could see. Not from weakness but from restraint. Because Sagittarius, you didn't come here to fit inside someone else's vision of love or purpose. You came to awaken what others forgot. There's a strange sensation that happens before a breakthrough. A tightness behind the eyes. A heaviness in the chest. A weariness that feels like grief but isn't. It's your soul outgrowing its cage. And lately you've felt it, haven't you? Not in words but in restlessness. In the sudden exhaustion from conversations that once sparked joy. In the ache when familiar spaces no longer feel like home. You're not being pulled down, Sagittarius. You're being pulled forward, toward a destiny that's been waiting for you to finally say yes. But before that door can open, something has to be released. And not just a habit or a thought, but a version of you that you built to survive someone else's failure to love you right. That mask you wore, the one that said, "I'm fine." The one that smiled through being overlooked. The one that held space for others while you quietly abandoned yourself. It's dying now. Not because you're losing control, but because your soul is ready to remember its original shape. And sometimes remembering looks like mourning. There's a kind of grief that doesn't belong to a person. It belongs to a timeline. To a self you carried with loyalty long after it stopped serving your growth. The you who waited too long. Who loved too hard. Who hoped even when it hurt. That version of you isn't disappearing as punishment. It's dissolving as a sacred right. And in its place, something ancient is rising. A remembrance. A rhythm. A roar you silenced for far too long. You may not know why certain names have been echoing lately. Why old memories revisit like ghosts at twilight. Why your dreams are more vivid, more chaotic, more emotionally charged. But this is not chaos. This is calibration. The universe doesn't destroy without intention. It rearranges. And what you're feeling now, the sense that something is about to snap or shift, is not a sign of breakdown but of breakthrough. You are nearing a soul convergence. The moment when everything you thought was lost returns. Not as it once was, but as clarity. You might be tempted to numb it, to busy yourself, to over-explain your sadness or rationalize the sudden tears. Don't. Let it rise. Let it swell and flood and overflow. Because what's coming next needs space. And the only way to make space is to surrender. You were never meant to hold it all. You were only meant to hold yourself. And Sagittarius, even when your hands trembled, you never dropped your soul. You held on, quietly, fiercely, sacredly. There's a memory you've been carrying that was never fully named, a heartbreak that shaped more than your love life. It shaped your self-worth, your boundaries, your silence. Someone once saw you in all your wild honesty and chose safety over truth. They turned away not because you lacked value, but because your light mirrored back their shadow. And you, still believing in redemption, gave them space to return. You prayed through their absence, you romanticized their potential. You made peace with being misunderstood. And in doing so, you nearly forgot that you were never the lost one they were. But here's what destiny knows that you may have forgotten. Nothing sacred is ever truly lost. And love, real unfiltered soul-aligned love, doesn't vanish. It transforms. Sometimes it leaves to evolve. Sometimes it returns in silence. And sometimes it never returns in form, but it leaves behind a parting gift. Wisdom. And this, dear Sagittarius, is your season of wisdom. Not the kind you read, the kind you earn through fire. This fire isn't here to punish you. It's here to refine you, to turn your softness into discernment, your longing into vision, your pain into prophecy. Because the version of you that emerges from this isn't the same Sagittarius who once waited by the window, praying for someone to choose them. It's the Sagittarius who realizes, I was never waiting for them. I was waiting for myself to remember who I've always been. You are not the echo. You are the call. You are not the chapter. You are the author. You are not the one who lost. You are the one who lived. And now the return begins. Not theirs. Yours. In Gate 2 we'll go deeper into this karmic tether, the soul thread that's been pulling at your energy, and why someone you once loved is feeling your presence again, even if they can't explain why. Gate 2. When the one you loved begins to feel you again, it always begins quietly. Not with a knock, not with a message, not even with a name. Just a stirring, a shift in the unseen. Sagittarius, you've likely felt it before they have. You've sensed the trembling of old threads, the faint pulse of a soul once tethered to yours reawakening. Not through words or memories, but through energy. And now, as your soul rises to meet its own reflection, someone from your past, a presence once unforgettable, is beginning to feel you again. But this time it isn't like before. This isn't the kind of return you hoped for when you were still aching. It's not the longing, not the fantasy, not the fragile apology you once clung to at night. No, this is deeper, older. This is a karmic rhythm humming from lifetimes past, pulling not because of unfinished business, but because something sacred is completing itself. The one who once walked away from your warmth, who didn't know how to stand beside your wild light without shrinking, now finds themselves haunted, not by guilt but by memory. A memory their mind tried to erase, but their soul never could. You've changed, and it's that very change they're feeling. They don't know how, but they sense the shift in the air. They feel their breath catch in moments where nothing should have stolen it. They wake at odd hours with your name echoing like a whisper they never meant to speak. They see signs, your birthday, a place you once loved, a song you used to hum, and they pause, momentarily transported. The universe isn't cruel. It's deliberate. And now, it is mirroring back to them the very connection they once turned their back on. But Sagittarius, here is the divine irony. They're not returning to find you where you were. They're returning to find themselves in the light of who you've become. And that is what confuses them the most. Because you no longer emit the same frequency. You no longer reach out, no longer carry the weight of their choices, no longer hold your breath waiting for them to see you. And because of that, the energetic thread that once flowed from your heart to theirs has changed direction. It no longer feeds them. It reflects them. In their dreams you appear. Not sad, not pleading, but sovereign. And even if they can't remember the dream upon waking, they carry its imprint throughout the day. That subtle ache of having touched something real and then lost it. You were once the dreamer. The one who believed that if love was pure enough, it would return on its own. You offered loyalty like breath, automatic, instinctual, and taken for granted. But life taught you something else. Life taught you that the most powerful act of love is sometimes to let go. And now that you've truly let go, not out of anger, but out of reverence for your own spirit, That's when they finally feel your absence not as silence but as a mirror. They think they miss you, but what they miss is the version of themselves that felt alive in your presence. The self they didn't know how to nurture until you showed them. The self they lost when they turned away from the warmth you offered so freely. But don't mistake this recognition as readiness. It isn't. Not yet. Readiness doesn't come from regret. It comes from reverence. And that's what the universe is now asking them to learn. As for you, Sagittarius, your role is no longer to carry them. You are no longer the light that bends to warm someone else's shadow. You are the light that stands unwavering, asking others to meet you in truth or step aside. And that's where your power has shifted most. Not in being loved, but in knowing you are lovable. Not in being chosen, but in choosing yourself first. This shift, this sacred reckoning, is not punishment for them, nor is it reward for you. It is justice in motion. It is karmic realignment. And yes, it may still sting when their name appears again. You may feel your pulse race at the thought of them reaching out. 'Cause memory is sticky. Memory is kind. It remembers the laugh, not just the silence. The tenderness, not just the betrayal. And your heart, so vast, so forgiving, has always been quick to feel before it guards. But now you know how to breathe through the echoes. Now you remember what it cost to wait at a door that never opened. And you're not standing at that door anymore. You're at a threshold of your own. One the universe carved just for you. Behind it is not a lover from the past, but a reunion with the self who stopped bending to be loved. The self who learned that not every return means reconciliation. Sometimes return means release. A final release. One that frees not only your soul but theirs. Because while your light once overwhelmed them, it is now the only light they crave. They've wandered through connections that looked shinier, easier, more predictable. They've played safe in the arms of the familiar. But nothing could replicate the soul recognition they once glimpsed in your eyes. And now that you've withdrawn your energy, they are left only with their reflection. And it is your absence that has become their reckoning. But still, Sagittarius, you must remain in your knowing. Because what's coming for you isn't a rerun. It's a resurrection. Not of what was, but of what could never be, because you hadn't yet become who you are now. If they return, let it be with sacred clarity, not need. Let it be with truth, not nostalgia. Let it be with reverence, not rescue. And if they don't return in form, trust that they've returned to themselves, through the light your love once offered. Either way, you are free. Because you are no longer holding their potential as your prison. You are no longer hoping that love will return to heal what you've already healed yourself. You are now a mirror, not a magnet. What reflects you will stay. What distorts you will fall away. Let this be your truth, Sagittarius. You were never meant to beg for love. You were meant to be love. And when love returns, let it rise to meet you. Not drag you backward into a story you've already outgrown. Because in Gate 3 we'll enter the sacred terrain of soul vows, the silent agreements that once tied you to pain, and the divine unraveling now taking place to free you, forever. Gate 3, breaking the silent vow that bound you to pain. Some promises are not spoken aloud. They are whispered in the soul, long before you knew how to name them. Sagittarius, there was a time, maybe in this life, maybe in another, when you made a silent vow. Not to them, but to your own heart. A vow to hold on, to believe, to carry the weight of something you thought was sacred. You didn't sign it with words. You signed it with devotion. With the tears no one saw. With the way you kept showing up long after the other person stopped deserving it. This vow didn't begin as a mistake. It began as love. You believed in what you felt. You believed it so fully that even when they left, a part of you kept the contract alive. You told yourself, I'll wait. I'll be here if they come back. I won't give up. You didn't even notice when your life started orbiting that decision. How many other connections you passed up. How many dreams you placed on hold. How many pieces of yourself you rearranged, hoping the space you made would one day be filled with the love you once gave so freely. But Sagittarius, not every soul you meet is meant to stay. Some arrive to awaken. And the most painful ones? They don't come to complete you. They come to show you where you've abandoned yourself. That person, the one who made you question your worth, the one whose absence became a wound, wasn't sent to break your heart. They were sent to show you where your boundaries collapsed in the name of longing. You thought it was love, and it was for a while. But love cannot survive where truth is denied. And the truth is, you kept your promise long after they broke theirs. You carried the torch of potential while they wandered through their shadows. You forgave them not once but silently over and over. Each time they failed to show up, each time they chose distance over honesty. You called that loyalty, but what it really became was a cage of your own making. Don't be ashamed of this. Don't look back with regret. That vow was the evidence of your heart's depth. Your soul needed to believe. It needed to know that it was capable of loving completely, and it did. But now the time has come to break the vow. Not in anger, not in rebellion, in reverence. The moment you stop holding space for a version of someone that only lived in your imagination, you begin holding space for the version of you that reality has been trying to birth. And here's where the energy shifts in your favor. When you stop chasing closure and start choosing clarity, the universe moves. The karmic knots begin to loosen. The emotional contracts that once bound your soul to another start to dissolve. Not because you've hardened, but because you've awakened. You were never meant to carry this alone. And yet you did. With grace. With fire. With faith. You became the quiet keeper of an unfinished story. You learned to breathe with half your heart clenched. And still you loved. Still you prayed. Still you hoped. But now, Sagittarius, your soul is done surviving. It's ready to thrive. And to do that, you must walk away from the soul vow that was never meant to be eternal. The part of you that still believes, if they changed we'd finally be right, is not wrong, it's just tired. It's tired of waiting, tired of pretending, tired of dimming itself for someone who never saw the brilliance it held. And here's the truth. They did see it. That's why they ran. You weren't too much. You were too real. And real requires reflection. Real demands growth. Real asks us to strip away our masks. They weren't ready. And maybe they still aren't. And that's okay. But you? You're ready now. Not for them. For yourself. This is the moment where you release the invisible contract. The promise you made to stay emotionally available just in case. The silent vow that said, maybe one day if I'm still here we can begin again. No, that day is not coming. Because today you are beginning again with yourself. And that, Sagittarius, is the most sacred return of all. You may feel grief in this release. That's natural. The soul mourns not just the person but the identity it shaped around loving them. You'll miss the dream, not the reality. You'll ache for what could have been, even as you know deep down that what was never aligned. But let that ache be your liberation. Let it guide you back to your fire. Light a candle if it helps. Write their name on paper, not in anger but in compassion. And then write yours beside it. Circle your name. Not to mark victory, but to reclaim the center of your story. Say this, even if only in your heart. I release the version of me that stayed. I bless the version of them I once loved. I break the vow that kept us entangled in pain. I return to myself now. And when you say it, feel the shift. You may not hear thunder. There won't be fireworks. But something inside you will breathe differently. The weight behind your ribs will loosen. Your dreams will become clearer. Your laughter will feel lighter. That's the soul unburdened. And don't be surprised if, in the quiet that follows, their energy returns. A message. A feeling. A name dropped in passing. The karmic tether will always pulse one last time before it severs. Let it come. Let it pass. You don't need to respond. You only need to recognize that the power dynamic has changed. You are no longer bound by the past. You are no longer orbiting someone else's gravity. You are your own constellation now. In Gate 4, we'll explore what happens after the vow is broken, the sacred reunion with your own spirit, and how the universe begins pouring into you everything you once gave away. Gate 4, returning to the self that was always waiting. It doesn't happen with music. It doesn't arrive with applause. There is no grand parade when a soul finally returns home to itself. And yet, Sagittarius, this is the most miraculous part of your journey so far. After everything, after the waiting, the surrender, the heartbreak, the unspoken vow you carried through lifetimes, there comes a stillness, a silence that doesn't ache, a breath that no longer hesitates. And in that quiet, you meet the version of you who has been waiting behind every sorrow, patiently, like a lighthouse that never stopped glowing through the storm. This part of your path isn't about someone else. It's not about closure or reunion or what they feel or don't feel. This is the moment when the camera pans back and shows that you were always the main character. And now, without needing to chase anything, you've become the one worth arriving for. Can you feel it? Subtle, I know. There is no clear sign, no ceremony, only a growing sense that your soul is no longer searching. And maybe that scares you a little, because for so long your identity was wrapped around holding space for them, for healing, for someday. You were the one who stayed behind, the one who held the memory like a lantern, even when no one came back for it. And now that lantern is no longer needed. The road ahead is illuminated not by longing, but by embodiment. You are not holding light. You are light. The return to self doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It means remembering who you were before it. It means gathering the scattered pieces of your voice, your worth, your laughter, and pulling them back into your chest. Not to be who you were, but to become more than you thought possible. This version of you doesn't crave answers. It doesn't obsess over timing. It doesn't replay conversations in the middle of the night. This version of you sleeps better, smiles more slowly, speaks less, but when it does, the truth lands like a sacred bell. And yet, Sagittarius, don't mistake peace for emptiness. Just because you no longer ache doesn't mean you've stopped caring. In fact, the caring has simply changed shape. It's no longer about whether they will return. It's about whether you are fully here. In your body, in your presence, in the way you pour tea, in the way you walk without rushing, in the way you trust your own voice, not because it's always right, but because it's always real. This is the reward. Not applause, not validation, not even new love, though that too may come in time. No, the true reward is the soft dignity of knowing you didn't abandon yourself when it would have been easiest to shut down. You stayed. You waited for your own becoming. And now you are witnessing the beginning of that becoming. Not in someone else's gaze, but in the mirror. You used to fear that healing would mean forgetting, that if you truly let go, it would mean none of it mattered. But look at you now. You've let go, and yet, everything sacred still remains. What was real didn't vanish, just stopped hurting. It returned not as a story but as wisdom. And that's the difference. You're not walking forward because you're escaping the past. You're walking forward because the past has already delivered its final gift. You. That younger version of yourself, the one who begged for love, who shrank in relationships, who bent their boundaries to be accepted, they're not gone. They're safe now, held within the stronger, softer self you've become. Every time you chose kindness instead of revenge, silence instead of blame, reflection instead of reaction, you were walking closer to this moment. And now you're here. Let that sink in. You are here. And nothing is missing. The door behind you is closed. Not slammed, not locked, just gently pulled shut by a hand that no longer needs to keep checking. You've stopped glancing over your shoulder. Not because you're bitter, but because you're finally full. You used to wait for the text, the call, the message that would undo the silence. But now you know that silence was your protection. That absence was your sanctuary in disguise. And what's ahead isn't louder. It's not flashier, but it is truer. Ahead of you is the life that always belonged to you. The creativity you silenced, the friends you forgot to nurture, the spaces in your home you never really lived in. You will laugh in places that once made you cry. You'll decorate the corners of your life with softness instead of survival. You'll stop asking if you're too much or not enough, because neither question belongs to you anymore. You'll meet new people, not because you're trying to replace the old, but because you've made room for resonance. Not everyone will get to stay. Not everyone should. But you'll know who belongs not by how they enter, but by how your soul responds when they do. If it feels like breath, not tension, then it's safe. If it feels like expansion, not performance, then it's real. Because Sagittarius, your soul has no interest in playing roles anymore. You've performed enough. You've learned how to hold silence, how to hold grief, how to hold uncertainty. Now it's time to learn how to hold joy, how to hold ease, how to hold peace without feeling like something must be wrong. Let this be your new ritual. Wake slowly, breathe deeply, speak kindly to yourself even if you don't fully believe it yet. Make tea for no one but you. Stand barefoot in sunlight and say, I am here. Write letters to the old you, not to change the past, but to honor how far you've come. Remind yourself that it's okay to be seen again. Not as someone broken or healing, but as someone simply alive. And if the past does return, as it sometimes will, Not to reclaim you but to test you. Remember this. You are not who you were when they left. You are not here to carry their lessons anymore. You are the lesson they'll carry when they realize what grace looks like in human form. In Gate 5, we will explore what happens after this return to self, when the universe begins to echo your alignment with opportunities, relationships, and sacred timing that were always meant for you, but could only arrive when you were finally home within. Gate 5, the universe answers when you are finally aligned. Sagittarius, you've been walking with your heart in both hands for longer than you even realize. Through deserts of doubt, through mountains of silence, through the long nights where it felt like your soul was holding its breath. And now something shifts. Not because you forced it, not because you finally proved yourself worthy, but because you stopped proving. You simply returned to being. And the universe, always listening, always waiting, has been holding its breath too, waiting for this moment. The moment when your soul's signal became clear enough for the sacred to respond. You see, nothing truly finds you until you find yourself. And now that you have, you're no longer chasing. You're radiating. You're not calling in love from lack. You're not begging the sky for signs. You're living as the sign. And that changes everything. It doesn't happen all at once. There's no trumpet. But suddenly things begin to arrive. A message you thought would never come finally appears. Maybe not from the person you expected, but from someone whose timing feels impossibly right. A stranger speaks a sentence you wrote in your journal the night before. An opportunity opens that feels eerily familiar, like you've already said yes to it in a dream. These aren't accidents. They're echoes, reverberations of your soul's frequency finally being matched. Because when you return to your truth, life responds with clarity. When you stop asking to be chosen and start choosing yourself every day in small, gentle ways. Lighting a candle just for your peace, choosing rest instead of proving, listening to your own silence instead of filling it with noise, you shift reality around you. Not by effort, by essence. Sagittarius, this is the sacred architecture of alignment. You're not manifesting by wishing. You're magnetizing by being. The things you once wrote off as too good to be true, begin to knock quietly, respectfully. Love that doesn't need you to shrink. Friendships that don't require a mask. Work that doesn't demand your soul in exchange for survival. And you, now rooted in your self-trust, can finally recognize what you once called a miracle as something normal for someone who knows their worth. Do you remember the version of yourself who would have settled for crumbs? Who would have taken back the person who half-loved you just because the silence scared you more than their absence? That version isn't here anymore. And because of that, neither are the tests that used to haunt you. The universe no longer has to test what's already been proven. You're done with lessons that require pain as their teacher. You've graduated. And now you're entering the realm of graceful challenges, the kind that build, not break. That stretch but don't shatter. You may begin to feel a strange confidence inside you. Quiet, steady, nothing loud. Just a sense that you don't need to explain yourself anymore. That your yes and your no are sacred instruments. That your boundaries aren't walls, they're gates, allowing in only what aligns with the peace you fought so hard to claim. This is what it means to walk in sovereignty. Not arrogance, not hardness, but embodied softness, the kind that cannot be manipulated because it knows its shape. And still, even now, part of you may doubt. It's okay. After all, you've spent years bracing for the next wave of disappointment. You've learned to survive on high alert. But look around. The war is over. The fire you kept putting out was never yours. And the emptiness you feared was just spaciousness waiting to be filled with what's real. Let it be filled. Let the invitations come. Let the laughter return. Let the quiet joy of being alive in your own presence be enough. Because what's coming to you isn't a reward. It's a mirror of who you've become. A reflection of every moment you chose self-compassion over self-erasure. Every time you stayed true to your intuition, even when it cost you a relationship, a job, an identity you were taught to cling to. And the ones who couldn't meet you there, let them go. Not with bitterness, with a soft smile that says, I now walk with those who speak the language of wholeness. Those who don't confuse peace with boredom, or vulnerability with weakness. Those who hold their wounds in their hands, not as weapons but as offerings. Those who know that real connection doesn't take, it circulates. Sagittarius, you are entering this new space not as someone seeking validation, but as someone who is validation. You are the answered prayer. You are the safe space you always wanted someone else to build. And because of that, you'll now attract those who are also ready to be sacred spaces. People who don't ask, "What can I get from you?" but, "What can we create together?" People who feel like sun on your skin, not storms in your gut. That is the true abundance. The arrival of what nourishes instead of drains. What expands instead of contracts. What allows you to exhale fully for the first time in what feels like lifetimes. And it's not just people. It's ideas too. Dreams you shelved long ago. Projects that once felt too big. That book you thought no one would care about. That move you postponed out of fear. All of it is surfacing again, but this time from a deeper place. A place of readiness. A place of embodiment. And now you no longer need permission. You only need breath. Presence. Willingness. The world may not recognize what you're becoming. That's okay. The sacred rarely makes sense to the secular. But the universe does. It recognizes the glow of someone who has turned their wounds into wisdom, who has turned their longing into light. And so, dear Sagittarius, as you walk into this next season, remember, it's not a new chapter because the calendar turned. It's a new chapter because you did. And in Gate 6, we will explore the spiritual legacy you are now writing. Not just for yourself, but for those who will one day find the courage to follow a similar path. The sacred continuation of the journey, where your healing becomes a beacon for others still lost in the storm. Gate 6, you become the light that guides others home. There comes a time in every awakened soul's journey when healing stops being just a personal process and begins to ripple outward. Not in some dramatic explosion, but in quiet gestures. In the way you hold space without needing to speak. In the way someone breaks down in front of you and says, "I don't know why I feel safe with you, but I do." Sagittarius, that time has come. You are no longer just walking your path. You have become the path. The lighthouse, not the ship. The echo, not the question. You didn't ask for this role. You didn't set out to become someone others would look to in their darkest nights. But that's the mystery of divine alignment. It prepares you in silence and then asks you to simply stand in what you've become. You may start to notice it already. Strangers telling you their secrets. Friends opening up more than they ever have. The people around you sensing your stillness, not as emptiness but as presence. What they feel is your embodiment, your steadiness, your ability to feel deeply without being swept away. You've become magnetic, not in appearance but in energy. Because when someone has walked through fire without turning to ash, you can sense it. When someone has held themselves in grief without becoming bitter, you can feel it. And when someone has loved without armor and still chosen to stay soft, you are that someone now. And though the world may never fully understand the cost of your softness, the soul does. And that's who you serve now, not ego, not performance, not reward. You serve soul. Yours first. Others by extension. Not as a savior. As a mirror. As proof that healing is not just possible, it is sacred. And necessary. And sometimes silent. You once needed someone to see you. To choose you. To explain why the ones you loved couldn't love you back. But now you don't need answers. Because you've become the one you were waiting for. And that version of you, soft but strong, luminous but grounded, is not just your final form. It is your starting point. Now you get to create. Create from the healed space, not the wounded one. Create from overflow, not emptiness. Create because it's joyful, not because it proves your worth. This is where destiny gets rewritten. Not through grand gestures but through sustained alignment. Through choosing peace again and again, even when no one's watching. Through letting your presence do the work words can't. And here's the truth, Sagittarius. Not everyone will understand you. Some will find your light too steady, your silence too loud, your boundaries too clear. Let them misunderstand. Let them project. You are not here to be decoded. You are here to shine. Not with arrogance. With reverence. For yourself. For the soul that clawed its way out of grief and decided to believe in beauty again. Because you do believe in beauty now, don't you? Even if softly. Even if just enough to open the curtain and let the light back in. Even if just enough to smile at the sky and say, "I'm still here." That belief, that whisper of trust is what births miracles. And now miracles are coming. Not because you finally deserve them, but because you finally stopped resisting the truth that you always have. They come in the form of conversations that feel like coming home, opportunities that align not with who you used to be, but with who you actually are. Loves that don't burn you alive but warm you. Spaces that don't require shrinking. And above all, a life that reflects your soul instead of requiring it to hide. You've walked long enough in exile. You've cried enough in silence. You've whispered enough prayers that began with, "I just want to feel." And now the universe responds, "Feel this. Feel you." And once you taste that, Sagittarius, you become untouchable. Not because you've closed your heart, but because you've opened it wide and survived. There is someone right now who needs to witness what survival looks like when it becomes sovereignty. They won't need a lecture. They'll just need to stand near your energy. They'll see your smile and remember their own hope. They'll hear your silence and know their own truth. You don't have to try. You just have to stay present. That's the gift you give the world now. And it's more than enough. Because in the end, the point was never just to heal. It was to become the one who remembers how to lead others back to the light they forgot was theirs. You are that now. You are the soft return, the sacred mirror, the light that doesn't chase but beckons, and the soul that no longer waits but welcomes. You've come full circle. And now, dear Sagittarius, you are the circle, the sacred container that turns pain into poetry, endings into entryways, and wounds into wisdom. Let the final gate be this. You are not what happened to you. You are what survived it. And now, you are what transcends it. Conclusion. This is not the end. This is the beginning of you. Sagittarius, if you've walked with me through this journey, then you know now. This wasn't a prophecy of endings. It was a revelation of beginnings. You are not standing in the ruins of your past. You are standing at the gateway of your rebirth. The pain you survived did not come to define you, came to refine you. Every silence you sat through, every unanswered question, every goodbye that broke your rhythm, it wasn't the closing of a door. It was the quiet turning of a sacred page. And now, as the universe leans in, it no longer asks, "Are you ready to receive?" It whispers, "You already are." You no longer wait for permission to rise. You rise because your soul remembers the shape of light. You rise because even in your most fragile moments, something ancient within you kept glowing. And now it's time to live as if that glow is no longer hidden, as if your truth belongs in the room, because it does. Let this be your decree. I, Sagittarius, walk in the light of my own becoming. I release what was never mine and step fully into the blessings that have always been waiting. No more running back to the past for closure. No more shrinking to fit old containers. You are the container now. You are the flame. You are the final word. And this is not goodbye. This is the return of your soul. And it's just getting started.